Where's the upside for crypto? This is Sectors Up Close, and we're talking cryptocurrency. Bitcoin hit a 2025 low on Monday, sliding alongside equities, even though President Trump had promised favourable policies that would make the US the crypto capital of the planet. So what's happened to the optimism around cryptocurrency? Well, Andrew O'Neill is Digital Assets Managing Director at S&P Global Ratings. Andrew, cryptocurrency was intended as a departure from the traditional financial system, but isn't it moving a lot like any other risky asset at the moment?
Well, Elena, thank you for having me. I think you're referring to price movements in the last few days, few weeks. Certainly, we've seen a trend where markets have moved to a risk-off paradigm in recent days, and clearly crypto has joined other asset class in that movement. I think when we come back to why crypto could be an asset that behaves differently. A lot of the assumptions behind that are things that are still developing, may over a number of years become true. But I would also highlight that then among crypto assets themselves, that there are significant differences. And when we're talking about that asset that may behave differently, that may be a hedge against currency debasement, for example, that may be uncorrelated to stocks. We're primarily focused on Bitcoin. We're focused on its characteristics as an alternate form of money. We're focused on the fact that it's decentralized, that it's geopolitically neutral, and we're starting to see adoption in that sense. So that narrative of investment appearing among institutional investors, among public sector investors, among national governments. But we are still very early in that trend. And so it's not very surprising that in an environment where investors are rapidly switching risk off in their portfolios, that we're seeing some correlation between crypto assets and other asset classes.
Yes, last year, of course, there was a lot of talk about Bitcoin being the new gold, about it becoming a safe haven asset. When do you think we will see that happen then? Or perhaps what needs to happen first?
So we've already seen an executive order announcing the creation of a US strategic Bitcoin reserve. And what that has done so far is allocating existing holdings of Bitcoin that the government has acquired through various law enforcement procedures to this reserve that will not be sold. There was some discussion in that executive order about adding to that reserve over time, if a way to do that can be found that does not bring additional cost to taxpayers. So we'll see over the next couple of months if proposals emerge or brought forward that carry that effect. There was a proposal made last year by Senator Cynthia Lummis, which aimed to accumulate 1 million Bitcoin over a period of 5 years, which would clearly be significant. Bring significant buying pressure to Bitcoin markets. That would be, for context, more Bitcoin than is actually produced on an annual basis, coming as a net new demand for the asset. So it's possible that some of the early exuberance this year in Bitcoin price was in anticipation of something like that being announced. So far, we've only had the announcement regarding Bitcoin already held. But we'll see in the next few months if something further comes on that.
Bitcoin investors have been a bit disappointed so far with the second Trump administration. Were they expecting further crypto-friendly moves that we haven't seen yet?
I think there is that aspect around additional buying coming from the National Reserve. Beyond that, I think crypto markets do bring in a certain amount of leverage that can lead to liquidations and more rapid price decreases. So we've kind of experienced that in the last few days with increasing liquidations across centralized and decentralized exchanges in crypto. But when we look at some of the early developments that we've seen since the change of administration, we've seen the repeal of SAB 121, which was a regulatory measure that effectively made it impossible for regulated banks to provide custody services on crypto assets. And so that's a major change in terms of bringing institutional players into the market. We expect to see regulation emerge on stablecoins in the US market this year, which will bring more comfort to regulated institutions using blockchain technology and using crypto rails to transact on. and again, more emphasis on participation in crypto markets. The last piece of that puzzle is market structure, which is a legal framework looking to say which regulator will be responsible for which area of the crypto market. That's also on the to-do list of the U.S. legislature, but these things take time, and it's certainly not surprising that that those things have not yet been brought into effect. But we would expect to see movement on that this year.
That was Andrew O'Neill of S&P Global Ratings. Don't forget you can watch more videos on Reuters.com.
Happy Bitcoin Friday, freaks. It's your host, Odell, here for another Citadel Dispatch, the interactive live show focused on actionable Bitcoin and freedom tech discussion. That intro clip was from Reuters, interviewing some suit from S&P, talking about Bitcoin. Completely irrelevant, really, to our today's discussion, but it felt notable enough to put in the beginning of Dispatch. So I want to thank you guys for sitting through that with us. As always, Dispatch is 100% audience funded. We do not have ads or sponsors. It is supported by all you ride or die freaks that continue to donate sats to the show. I see we have some of our ride or dies already in the Nostr live chat. It's good to have the Nostr live chat back up and on screen today for this episode or this show. I will start off by saying that I may have blamed some technical difficulties on Zapstream by Kieran, but it appears my stream key was rotated and I had not adjusted that on my side. So hand up, I'll take full blame for that. But we have Super Fat Arrow has already zapped 21,000 sats. Easy has zapped 3,000 sats. And our top boost from the last two shows was from Wood Butcher, 4,200 sats, and he said, God bless capitalism. Love to see it. We have Ride or Die Freak Dan Gould here to join us. It is his second time on the show, first time as a solo guest. We'll be talking about Payjoin. We'll be talking about using Bitcoin privately. We'll be talking about many things. How's it going, Dan?
Good. Talk about whatever you want. It's something I've been looking forward to a long time.
An interesting place to start, just a relevant newsworthy item. I was pretty excited about this DOJ memo that came out saying that they're getting rid of their crypto enforcement division and that they will not be focused on individuals and developers that are running or that are maintaining sovereignty-focused Bitcoin software. I think they called out by name mixers and tumblers and self-custody wallets. Do you have any opinions on that?
As soon as that came out, my first reaction was, I can't wait for Lola Leets to report on this, which did come right after from the Rage. It's an internal memo. It's not really a law. It's not even guidance like FinCEN has. We'll see what actually changes. It's a narrative shift, but I'm cautiously optimistic to look at it as anything more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the constant skepticism from Lola. She is quite unique in the Bitcoin journalism space. And I don't think she's wrong, right? Like, it's definitely not a panacea, but I think it's also absolutely massive. Like, I think it's pretty crazy that a year ago, less than a year ago, we had the Samurai developers thrown in jail. And today we have the DOJ shuttering the same crypto enforcement division that led that case. I mean, they're obviously still in jail. They still have a court case. Lola rightfully pointed out that they said that that part is out of scope. They took that out of the memo. But yeah, I think it's a big deal. I think she also reported today, at least on Nostr, that the broker-dealer rule from the IRS is out, which wanted to do KYC on self-custody exchanges. And she seemed pretty optimistic on that. So I don't know. It feels like a lot of progress is being made. It feels like we have a window here where at least the U.S. government isn't actively trying to throw open source contributors into the gulags. And we should probably be seizing the moment.
Absolutely. It's time to take as much as we can that enables self-custody, like sovereign self-custody mainstream, and raise the bar in terms of what's expected for bare minimum privacy.
Damn right. Okay, so let's just dive right in. You've been focused on Payjoin, specifically Payjoin Dev Kit. Let's start high level. What is Payjoin?
Payjoin is the most fundamental way to batch transactions on the input side. So almost everyone's familiar with output batching. When you make a withdrawal from any exchange, they're going to make a ton of inputs or a ton of outputs in that transaction to pay out their users because they make less change and they share the overhead and they save money. But
so if I do a strike withdrawal, you'll when you look up your strike withdrawal on mempool.space or whatever, that transaction is really sending Bitcoin to maybe 200 people, 300 people, including you. And that's that output side batching.
Exactly, because they save a ton of money and it doesn't clog up mempool. So they're able to have high throughput. So that happened all in 2017 when mempools were full and fees were getting more and more expensive. Everyone's like, how do you scale a database, which fundamentally Bitcoin blockchain is? And you do that with batching. And that is consensus. I mean, there was even calls from the community at large, like naming and shaming people that didn't do batching until they did it. It was very effective.
Okay, but in that situation, usually it's just one or two on the input side. There's one or two input transactions.
Well, yeah, there may be any number of inputs, but they all come from the exchange. The exchange constructs this transaction so that there are enough inputs to fund all of their withdrawals. They sign it and they post it to the network. And that has been great for throughput. It's reduced the fees everyone pays, but it doesn't address this problem that even Satoshi left in the white paper, that anyone looking at a transaction can assume that all the inputs came from the same person. But because of the way that Bitcoin works, any inputs can be spent in a transaction as long as they have a signature. So if the person sending the transaction and the person receiving the transaction both talk to each other, they can contribute inputs and break that assumption. And that lets us do a ton of stuff. It lets us save fees because it's even better batching. You're packing more intents into one transaction, and it raises the bar in terms of the minimum privacy everyone gets, because that assumption about how money flows in the chain is no longer true. That assumption that all the inputs come from one person.
Right. So just to unpack it a little bit, with Bitcoin surveillance and transaction tracking, it's all just probability analysis. And so what is that probability analysis? The probability analysis is these surveillance firms are trying to figure out what percent chance is there that ownership has changed hands between Bitcoin UTXOs. And the main heuristic they use for that is common input ownership heuristic. This idea that everything on the input side is owned by the sender, and who's a single person or a single entity. With Payjoin, multiple parties can contribute inputs. So all of a sudden you break that fundamental probability assumption that everyone on the input side is the same entity.
Yeah, and there's other tech that
yeah.
breaks this too, but Payjoin is the most convenient way to do that. Everything around Payjoin is set up so that any two software services can set up a standard way that they can talk to each other and arrange to make this kind of batch if they're both online.
So then why don't you so the privacy improvement is clear. I mean, is that you're breaking this you're breaking that probability assumption, that common input ownership heuristic. How does that process of adding additional inputs that aren't, maybe they're not even necessary to fulfilling the transaction. I mean, you could do the transaction without Payjoin. How does that save fees?
Yeah, the really interesting savings comes from creating fewer coins overall. So this is the same thing with receiver side batching that I think it's not readily apparent to people the first time they think about it. So when you batch a bunch of outputs, yes, all of these transaction intents share one transaction and they share that 10 byte overhead. But really the big savings comes from not every single output to someone withdrawing from an exchange, say, creating change. So if there's a change for every single person that withdraws, that input then needs to be spent at some point in the future. But if you batch them all together, you can batch 300 people and just get one change. And the input is actually the expensive part of a transaction that includes the witness and the script. So when you do a Payjoin, you can do the same sort of thing where if I was going to send some exchange some money and they knew they needed to make a withdrawal, they would have to take my UTXO and then they would need to spend it again. And we would both create change. But instead, we can do something called cut through, where some proposal to a receiver, an exchange from a depositor, can directly fund withdrawals. So in some cases, the exchange may not even need to spend their internal coin. The sender can fund the transaction that directly pays the people making withdrawals. And overall, there are both fewer transactions and there are fewer coins created. So that is where the savings comes from.
So if there's like 100 people depositing to Strike at the same time as there's 50 people withdrawing from Strike, then those 100 people that are depositing could actually be on the input side of the withdrawal transaction, and you kind of knock off both sides at the same time.
That's what we want to do long term, yeah.
Okay, so what is Payjoin Dev Kit and where does it fit into this whole mission?
Yeah, Payjoin Dev Kit. Payjoin Dev Kit was the way to get me to have people understand what the hell I was working on, because Lightning Dev Kit was working so well, Bitcoin Dev Kit was working so well, and I was working on kind of the same thing, a software development kit to let any wallet or service take advantage of this technology. But without that branding, people didn't get what it was. And this is where Payjoin's a bit different than a lot of what has come before in terms of privacy tech. It only really works if everyone is using it or if a significant number of people are using it. So Payjoin Dev Kit lets you take this off-the-shelf protocol implementation and plug it into your wallet. So Bull Bitcoin just released in December this Payjoin Dev Kit integration into their wallet, and we were able to demonstrate its use also in Bolt's exchange and Liana over this past week. So it's an off-the-shelf toolkit any software can take, plug into their wallet, and activate Payjoin.
Because if for this to work, you kind of need widespread wallet and like service support, right? Like the exchanges would need to support it, and the people who are, I guess, the people that are depositing their wallets would need to support it, not necessarily on the receiver side, right?
Matt, in an ideal world, you'd want the receivers to do this too,
Oh, I
because
guess,
any transaction intent, you can think of this as kind of a pseudo mempool. It's like before we get to mempool, if we're willing to communicate with other people, we can take all the transactions we want to make and batch them together, and everyone saves money. But yeah, that's the idea.
You need as many, but you just need as many wallets and services to support it as possible for it to work at scale, basically. And so the Payjoin Dev Kit makes it easy for all of these different maintainers to add support, right?
Yeah, I think of it as HTTPS. That was controversial in its day, but now it's ubiquitous, and so everyone has better privacy. The only real way we can do this upgrade to Bitcoin is by making it network-wide, which in the application world, if you're not changing the actual protocol, you need many people to participate in. And the reason that Payjoin lets this happen across the network and not just between the people that use it is because a lot of the transactions that went through this process look the same as transactions that didn't necessarily go through this process. So you have a greater degree of ambiguity on whether all the inputs came from one person or not for everyone.
If you just like see a non-Payjoin transaction on mempool.space, for instance, you might not be able to tell if it's a Payjoin or not, right? So it just breaks that.
Yeah, it's complex because there are a lot of other fingerprints, but this is kind of the least we can do in a package that can be automatic for all this software. So you plug it into your wallet, your users don't have to take additional actions. It's just packed into the flow that everyone's used to. You send me an address, basically a URI, and like some payment instructions, and I pay that by pasting that address, and my wallet takes care of the rest. If there's an opportunity to batch, we do the Payjoin batch. If not, we fall back. And everyone gets this as a convenience. I think in the past, a lot of these techniques have involved a lot of know-how. And if you didn't use them right, you could make mistakes and you might have paid a bunch of money and time and not even be any better off. This is about the widespread increase for everyone. Everyone has a higher degree of privacy, whether they even use this or not. By it existing.
I love that. And I love it just falls back. It'll just do a regular transaction if the Payjoin process fails. Yeah. But one of the big, not necessarily issues, but trade-offs with Payjoin historically has been that it needs to be interactive, and that, so effectively all senders and receivers need to be online to like coordinate with each other and sign and broadcast this transaction. My understanding is that's no longer the case. And how are you handling that information exchange?
The beauty of Bitcoin is that it's non-interactive. You just take a transaction, you post it, you submit it to whatever mempool, and eventually it'll get mined in a block. Payjoin takes advantage of the fact that most of us are online some of the time. So the fallback is there in case we're not. But if we are, we can both use what's essentially a mailbox to coordinate together. So the problem with the past, so there were two iterations. This has been going on since 2018. And the standard communication required you to run a publicly accessible server to receive Payjoins. But we, meaning the Payjoin Dev Kit team, came up with a directory server that hosts these mailboxes, and anyone can host one of these servers. And you put your message in the mailbox, and the person that is waiting for your payment is listening to updates for this. And just like email, when that message comes in, they can reply to it. And if they don't reply to it in time, we fall back.
Okay, so it's still interactive. It's just like it's a looser interaction.
it's asynchronous, so we don't need to be online
Yeah.
at the same time because there's that box in the middle. As long as we come on within some time frame we're both comfortable with.
And
we
what
can
is that
coordinate.
time
This
frame?
is like Lightning is the same thing. Lightning, you
Right.
need to come online to communicate, and a big issue with like Zaps is that it's a synchronous protocol for the most part right now. But if we make that asynchronous, this problem goes away, and that's where like an npub.cache makes things easier because they're always online on your behalf. The async Payjoin spec says there's someone that can always be online on your behalf. It's not exactly the same, but yeah. What was the question you just asked?
Like in practice, how long do you think that period will be?
Oh, by default, we set it to 24 hours in clients, just
Okay.
like your typical Lightning invoice, but it's configurable on the client. So application specific. I think exchanges with exchange rates will probably have narrower constraints, like BTC Pay's exchange rate holds for an hour. And it's application specific. The point of the protocol is not to, and I'm talking about the BIP77 v2 async Payjoin protocol that's being finalized right now.
Right.
The point is that everyone can communicate on the same standard just to make a batch. It doesn't restrict itself to the transaction needs to be of this certain shape or amount or within a certain time frame. Is just a very fundamental, convenient way we can attempt to talk to each other, and hopefully we're able to, and if not, we fall back.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't think, even 24 hours would probably be fine for most people. I mean, there's some precedent already, right? So, like, for instance, at least to my knowledge, both Strike and Cash App offer, you can like pay for a priority withdrawal, or you can get a free withdrawal that happens sometime within 24 hours, right? And plenty of people choose I'm willing to wait up to 24 hours. Usually it doesn't take a full 24 hours, but I'm willing to wait up to 24 hours to have a free withdrawal.
And those are the best targets for the cut through, because if a bunch of people are queued up to have their withdrawal and a Payjoin comes into the exchange, that person depositing to the exchange can preempt that queue. It can pay everyone.
Exactly. So my point is like there's already effectively like real world user testing that people are like fine with that time period. Maybe you'd want it to be a little bit shorter, but that makes sense to me. Now, in practice, like just walk us through this. If let's use easy numbers, 100 people are depositing, 100 people are withdrawing, and it's a cut through Payjoin. That means every single person in that transaction needs to be online for at least a little bit during that period, right?
Not exactly. So there's a couple levels to this thing. The Payjoin V2 spec is really only for one sender and one receiver, but that one receiver can define as many outputs as they want. So your base case is that there's a queue at an exchange where people are willing to wait. A depositor sends some money to the exchange, and that preempts the whole queue. If the exchange needs to add some input to pay for that, they can add that input, but because it's only one back and forth round of communication, it only really works with one depositor. Now, we did just sneak in a feature into our last release of Payjoin Dev Kit that allows multiple senders to send to one receiver. But still, that one receiver is defining all of the outputs. So from the perspective of the depositor, they're only interacting with the exchange, but the exchange is free to choose all of the outputs. So they can forward payment to anyone, but those people making withdrawals are not part of the interaction.
It's just the deposit side is.
Just the deposit side, because they need to provide signatures. And because they need to provide signatures, you need to interact until that's done.
Right. On the withdrawal side, it's just the exchange providing like all the withdrawal addresses like they usually do.
Yeah.
And then had the amounts or whatever. Okay. So that's way more doable too. Because then the exchange just has like, I guess you use the word queue. It has like a queue of withdrawals that are like their free batch withdrawals, and they just wait till they have an appropriate amount of inputs on the sender side to do the transaction. Boom, done.
At some point in the future, maybe we can have receivers too, and we can have the receiver specify what output they want, because then even the exchange wouldn't know exactly what address they sent to. They'd get a proof of payment, but like for the highest version of this, I want to be able to send to you. I don't really care what address you have, as long as I get some proof that it ended up in your address. I don't actually want to know what your address is.
Right. That all makes sense to me. You mentioned earlier that there's some nuances in terms of Payjoin fingerprinting. I mean, the
wallet fingerprinting, yes.
Yeah, the hype answer is always, with Payjoin, if we get like 5% of transactions using Payjoin, then everyone has privacy. What are the new, like, where are the nuances there in terms of being able to tell which transactions are Payjoin versus which ones aren't?
It's tough because this 5% number just comes from what people think of as statistically significant. Like that number is literally pulled out of the sky. And I think a lot of people in research community say 5% is statistically significant, but that P value can change. And the other tricky part is because the Payjoins blend in, it's impossible for us really to collect data on exactly how many Payjoins there are. And by Payjoin here, I'm not talking about the coordination. I'm talking about, let's say, common input transactions that break that assumption, and those that don't. So it is a vibes-based measurement. But if this is widespread, if it's significant to some degree, then you do have compounding ambiguity in what happened in every transaction. Because if I'm doing the analysis, I have to make a guess. I have to say, I think there's a 5% chance, there's an N% chance that these inputs came from different people. And every hop along the way, that whether or not the input is linked to the output is uncertain to me. The probability compounds. Wallet fingerprinting is a little bit different in general. So like some wallets will maybe use a certain nlock time or a certain script type, and you can follow their activity because this software only produces transactions with this shape. But I believe in general, batching this stuff together helps make those fingerprints less distinct, because it's unclear what software is producing what fingerprint. You got to go through the source code and like pull out what fingerprints this stuff is making. There's great work at ishana.com about this, but that's
what
an
is
active
that?
area improvement.
How do you spell that?
ISHAANA, ishana.com.
Got it. I mean, part of that gets kind of solved if the more wallets that add Payjoin support, right? Because that fingerprint is what wallet was used to construct the transaction. So if that wallet has Payjoin support, then it kind of solves that.
And if all these things are plugged together in a big graph, it's very difficult to find the cluster, the edge of the cluster. Yeah.
But like in a real world scenario, like I think most Bitcoiners in our bubble don't realize that the number one self-custody wallet in the world by far is Trust Wallet by Binance, which is an absolutely horrible Bitcoin wallet, but supports Tron and Solana and everything else. So many people use it. And for instance, they probably have, I mean, I don't know, I'm speaking out of my ass, but my guess is that they have a relatively obvious fingerprint when you do a Trust Wallet transaction. I mean, for starters, I think they just reuse addresses. But so if you're a user of that, then you're not getting any of the passive Payjoin privacy benefits because it's very obvious you're sending from Trust Wallet. So in that situation, you're clearly not using Payjoin, right?
Yeah, got that fingerprint. You're probably stuck with it. There is a limit to how effective Payjoin can be. If you're using the same address every time, even if you're involved, you're not going to be helped. There is basic hygiene we need to promote at, devs and promoters in the space that people clean up.
So, if I recall correctly, there was a Payjoin implementation that might still exist that was pushed, that was implemented by BTC Pay Server, that I think Kooks was the maintainer of, and they had like this concept of, I think he called it like a snowball, where like the idea was that if you're the receiver, you could get fee savings by using transactions where you're receiving. Let's say you're a merchant, and you could basically consolidate UTXOs, because the number one fee burden for transactions is how many UTXOs you have on the input side. So ideally, if you care about fees, you want to consolidate UTXOs. But if you consolidate UTXOs, you have privacy loss. So why not use Payjoin to do that process for you? So you don't have privacy loss, but you do have consolidation. So you have fee savings. What is your opinion on that?
That stuff's great. All of this Payjoin Dev Kit is built on the foundation that Kooks and Nicholas and the contributors to BIP 78, Payjoin version 1, worked on. So it's totally backwards compatible with that. That protocol is limited because of the liveness assumption. It requires sender and receiver to be online at the same time. But for someone like a merchant, it still works. You lose a little bit on the metadata protection, but it still works.
Yeah, that was my next question. Like, isn't it a heuristic itself, the snowballing? Like, isn't that kind of obvious on chain that that's what you're doing and it's a Payjoin?
It is, but it's no different really than if you're making a peel chain by sending a small amount and receiving change and sending a small amount from that change the same direction. The way you'd get by that is by batching some outputs or making some intermediate transactions. But still, even if you have this snowball, all of the inputs to that transaction might not necessarily come from the same person, and you might be making a bigger change. Maybe there's an amount that maybe there's a Payjoin out. It's hard to distinguish. So you don't know if this snowball, the big ball, is going as change to the sender or the receiver. You don't necessarily know the direction. You might be able to make some assumptions about it, but I don't think that problem is as clear cut to analyze as some of the naysayers might think.
It would probably have to be more of an active attack rather than like a passive attack looking back on the chain, right? Because you could do like, if you're thinking is a merchant using Payjoin and a snowball, you can just do some transactions to the merchant, open up their BTC Pay server, send some money, see how it flows. But that's obviously completely different than like looking back 5 years on the chain or something, right?
If you're second party to the transaction, if you are the sender, you can see the change.
Yeah.
Or you can see the consolidation between the receiver.
Yeah, you would know.
Yeah, that is a big issue that needs to be alleviated and only can really be fixed if we have these multi-party Payjoins where there are multiple senders and multiple receivers. Right now, because there's only two people involved, I know what, like if I'm sending money to you, I know what inputs and outputs are mine. You know what inputs and outputs are yours. Until we have another person involved, that's always the case. I guess there is a caveat there, which is if you're the receiver, you can make outputs that forward money to other people. And I don't necessarily know about that, but I would not rely on that strictly.
I mean, and you have this, I mean, the big issue there, right, is that, let's just use the merchant example again. Like if a merchant's doing Payjoin and I'm trying to figure out their transaction graph, they're disclosing UTXO ownership that they might not otherwise to me when they're giving me their input, right? Like, is there like almost like a denial of service style? It's not really denial of service, but like a input harvesting kind of information gathering attack that could happen there if you're pulling inputs from the target.
As a probing attack in the literature. It's a probing attack. So on payjoindevkit.org, there's a blog post all about the probing attacks that have been discussed since the earliest days of this, before even the first spec by Ryan Havar came out when he was trying to build a Payjoin protocol for Bust-A-Bit. this is before HTTP servers, before PSBTs were even a thing. This was talked about, and it's mitigated to some extent by the receiver requiring a payment in order to consolidate. But also, the receiver should only be consolidating what they are comfortable consolidating. If I'm going to pay a BTC Pay server and they have some input that they never want to consolidate, they don't want their customers to know about, they're just never going to consolidate that. If they were going to consolidate it otherwise, because they needed to make a big payment later, because they needed to make a big transfer to an exchange to get some fiat, that's the type of input you would want to use anyway. Payjoin, like I said, it doesn't make any requirements on coin selection. That's all up to the implementing wallet, and is a problem to be solved unto itself. We've got a research team working on these problems too, but they're a little bit outside of the scope of the Payjoin coordination itself.
So when you say require a payment, the whole idea there is you're putting a cost to the attack, right? So like they're going to have to send you Bitcoin, and so if they keep doing the attack to try and... Did you really lose me? I still have you. You don't have me? I still have you.
I wish there was a way to post this to the live chat, the probing attacks paper, because we just came up with this. There's a big
Can you not hear me? Can you not hear me?
PayjoinDevKit.org.
Let's see. Yeah, I think I lost Dan. Live chat, do you see me or Dan? Or both of us? Leave and come back. Live chat, do you still have me? We got Mav21 zapped 10,000 sats. We have Lido zapped 2.1 thousand sats. We have Chief White zapped 4.2 thousand sats, and Mataru zapped 1,111 sats. We have Space Bear saying we see both. I just thought I heard Dan rejoin, but I do not see him. Let's see if he's texting me. You lost me. Rejoin. Okay, he rejoined. Let's see. Dan, can you hear me?
Test.
I see your internet as like trash. And oh, I hear you now. I think it was your side, but who the hell knows? They're trying to stop the signal.
Yeah, they can't.
I don't remember what we were talking about.
Probing attacks, mitigations. Yeah, this problem has been around for years. It's mitigated. Basically, you require a payment to receive money, and you always have that fallback broadcast.
So there's a cost.
There's a cost to it, yes.
Yeah. So that they'll run out of Bitcoin eventually if they're trying to figure out your UTXOs.
Yeah, and if they try to make the same request, if they have the same inputs, you ban them. You just say, I'm not gonna Payjoin with you.
Right.
Their money.
Oh, because you have the fallback, so you can just take the money. You mentioned multi-party input side transactions. Where do we stand on that? Is that a 6-month problem? Is that a year-long problem? When release?
So it's launched. We just launched one that lets you do multiple one receiver. It's in Payjoin 0.23. It's unlag, but you can use it. In terms of multiple receivers interacting, this is probably like a year or two it depends. So right now, in terms of implementations, we can be taken off the shelf and integrated, but to have all the testing and make the thing work really well, it takes engineers on both teams, on our team and on the to do. We've got research too. I'm not sure. I'm losing connection again. Let me check.
We can kind of hear you. You cut in and out a little bit.
Actually, we're it requires
You
more
sound
interaction.
horrible.
That's the trickiest part.
Try turning off your camera. You're all popcorny for us. Well, it was a great rip. I think we lost him again. We've lost him again. What's up, freaks? You have any questions for me while we're waiting for Dan to come back in? Lightning Q&A. Oh, here comes Dan.
You told me add him back for 15 minutes, so I figured I'd just play with my network connection and see what I could get away with.
You look clear as day now. Did you change something?
Yeah, change networks.
Oh, there we go. Okay, we're back. Back in business, freaks. We were talking about multi-party. You said we have it under an experimental flag. Basically, the bottleneck is you have to work. You guys have to do work on your side, but then also the implementers have to do it on their side.
Okay,
right?
so there's two things that Payjoin Dev Kit is working on mainly. We're doing Payjoin integrations, like we have to get this thing out into the world, and we have research. And right now, almost all of our research effort has been shifted over to implementation, because it doesn't make sense for us to come out with this V2 protocol and then just immediately work on this async protocol and immediately work on the multi-party protocol. Then nothing ever gets done. We have to actually prove this stuff works. So we got in Bolt Bitcoin. We've made some proof of concept for Bolts and Liana. Like we've shown this stuff works, but it's a big effort to get this stuff working with wallets in a way that someone is comfortable putting big money through. We've got QA now. We've got a person that's just shout out Ben Allen for chomping away at the bit there, just making sure stuff works. As we roll those out, we'll be able to focus more on both the multi-party protocol and then the development in the kit, so that anyone that's already integrated Payjoin Dev Kit can just flip a switch basically and turn on multi-party. But right now, we're doing the integrations, and we have more people asking for the integrations than we can build quickly. That is the biggest bottleneck. Got it.
Okay, that makes sense. And I didn't ask you, how is the communication handled? Is there like a coordination server or something? Does the exchange run the coordination? How does that work?
There's two servers involved. We use something called Oblivious HTTP. So the async Payjoin spec, like I said, has these mailboxes, and anyone can run a directory server that hosts the mailboxes. Right now, Payjoin Dev Kit hosts one, and we just came up with a way for anyone to host one to be reachable by these Oblivious HTTP relays. So why are we using Oblivious HTTP? Because the directory shouldn't need to know about your IP address. To do that, Oblivious HTTP enforces that there's a proxy in the middle. That's one of these relay servers. And up till this point, those have mostly been the wallet service providers. Because if you're a wallet, you probably already know your user's IP. You may not. Some of them, like Cake, really let you dial in you can have your own Electrum server, you can have your own node, but not everyone does that.
Sparrow refuses, like Craig Raw will never run a server.
Yeah. So you can just plug in either one of these standard servers as your configuration. Well, the Oblivious HTTP servers are really the configuration. You choose who you want to proxy to, and you can reach a directory, which is defined by the receiver. The receiver says, I'm listening at this mailbox, talk to me here. And you communicate to that through one of these proxies using OHTTP, oblivious HTTP.
Got it. That makes sense.
It's a web standard. Apple uses it for their private relay. So that's really where it came from. It's this standard that is becoming ubiquitous. I mean, even it's in Firefox for oblivious HTTP, like DNS over oblivious HTTP. It's getting all over the place.
And for the end user, like 99% of end users will have no idea that this is really how this is working in the background.
That's the whole point.
They're just
yeah.
scanning a deposit address and pressing send.
Yeah, it's like two-hop Tor. So if that directory server and the relay colluded, then they could match the IP address to the two people communicating. But otherwise, the directory just knows it's talking to proxies, and clients just know they're talking to proxies and what directory server. They never learn each other's IP addresses, and the directory server doesn't have enough information to know that two IP addresses are talking to each other.
And if the user wanted extra protection, they could use a VPN as well, or Tor.
Yeah.
Okay, that all makes sense to me.
It's all about raising the bar on the default. That's everything we're doing is about making the default way, the convenient way, have a minimum privacy.
Right. What do you say to the user that maybe, for privacy reasons, only pays merchants or deposits to exchanges using Lightning? Should they keep doing that? Should they switch to Payjoin if their merchant or service supports it? How do you think about that?
Keep doing that. It depends. This is someone that's not interested in self-custody?
Why? Because you can't self-custody Lightning?
Well, the thing is, if you're doing Lightning self-custody, you probably need to move coins around from time to time. And in those cases, you can use Payjoin with your Lightning
for
node.
that.
Yeah, they solve different problems. I think they're compatible. That's everything we've built has been as a building block too. So Payjoin plugs into the existing infrastructure. It doesn't try to push people out of the way. It makes the Lightning Network have more privacy because the analysis of the blockchain gives you even less data into what's going on the Lightning Network if Payjoin is being used, if fewer assumptions can be made about what channels are related to what clusters.
Right. Would you consider so a Lightning channel open is a 2 of 2 multisig between you and your channel party, where both parties are providing inputs to the transaction. Do you consider that already a Payjoin, or is that just like a semantic thing?
I think it's a semantic thing, but I don't think it hurts to think about it as a Payjoin. It definitely breaks the common input heuristic. Well, not really.
Not really, right? It's like it's like 2-person common input.
Yeah, I guess the output
heuristic. It's like those two people have the same.
But the output
amount.
of the channel, when you close the channel, you don't know which output that's made came
is whose.
who exactly.
Yeah.
So it does break it in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, like unless you're doing active surveillance on the Lightning channel,
which
capacity.
I think it's
through
worth
probing,
assuming that that's being done if you want any privacy guarantees.
But probably isn't. You should assume it, but it probably isn't for most people's channels.
I mean, the inputs, you know who's participating in the channel because that's all broadcast information, right?
Right. But you don't necessarily know, unless you're actively probing, you don't know
balances of the channel.
The active balance.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that helps create that ambiguity between which inputs and outputs are connected at the end of the channel close.
Scenario. So I guess to the next part of that question is like, there's probably a scenario where we could have multi-party, like more than 2 people Payjoins for channel opens for Lightning too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even before we get to that, there's something in terms of convenience that is a reason you might want to use Payjoin. So like, I'm funding a Lightning channel for the first time. I have some coins on a non-Lightning wallet. I want to put them into the node with a wallet to open channels. I would typically have to communicate using the chain, which is annoying and leaves a fingerprint, where I'd send my funds into the Lightning Node's single sig wallet, and then I would create a multi-party channel. But instead, if the two wallets can talk to each other, I can just send a fallback message to my node saying, hey, I want to send you money. Do you want to open any channels? And you manage both sides. So you're just going to say, yeah, open a channel. That's going to construct the transaction that actually opens the channel, put it back to your wallet. Say it's an exchange that supports Payjoin. They'll still sign because it's the same amount of money and it's authenticated by the receiver. And then that one transaction funded from an external wallet can fund your channels, and it could even splice in perhaps. It's really just a matter of sending messages back and forth. Adding that little bit of interaction where we can lets us build all sorts of these cut through transactions. Another one, like we just proved was possible, was with the Liana inheritance refresh. Do you mind if I talk about that a little bit?
Let's go for it.
Yeah, so Liana has this degrading time lock, and so your coins are in this time lock where after say 10 years pass, then someone else can spend your coins. And the reason you would want this is, say you die, like you want someone to be able to recover your coins, but you need to consistently refresh that, especially if you wanted someone to have the access to the money sooner, say like within 6 months, if they wanted to, if they had some payments to make to clean up your estate. So when you receive a Payjoin to one of these wallets, it can say, don't just create a new coin with this policy. It can spend all of the coins or some of the coins that have this policy and refresh the time lock in the same transaction that it receives from an outside wallet. So this is less privacy focused until all of this stuff is taproot and difficult to see the policies. But still, we at least that refresh can be an automatic user experience where every time that user wants to increase their stack, they're refreshing their time lock at the same time, so they don't have to worry as much.
Every time I'm adding DCA to my cold storage or whatever, it would refresh my time lock, otherwise it wouldn't. Otherwise, you'd have to send another transaction.
Right.
That makes sense. And so specifically I don't know how you made it this far, but to the freaks that are listening that maybe are a little bit confused about that Liana example, is it's using miniscript and time locks, and you have to constantly refresh it. And the whole idea, and just correct me if I'm wrong, the whole idea there is when that time lock ends, it goes from like a multi-sig to a single sig. And so you can use it in like an inheritance type of situation where your heir only has access to the single sig. And so that your heir can't rug you unless you stop refreshing your time lock, because otherwise your heir is in your threat model, right?
Yeah. Shout out to Armin Saburi and Artur for getting this out last weekend. They did this in the weekend. I have no idea. I don't know. It was nuts.
I think I'm going to have Rob Hamilton on the show in the coming weeks, who's one of the preeminent miniscript influencers and co-founder of AnchorWatch, which has their Trident wallet. And do you know, are there any other miniscript wallets between Trident and Liana? Are those the two?
I don't know. I know you keep pushing Rob to open source his stuff, and he's really missing out. If he was open source, we would have done it on AnchorWatch. This would have already been done.
So you heard it at the MIT Bitcoin Expo in person. Me pressuring him. What'd you think of MIT?
I've been to those expos since I think 2018, and that was the best one. I think partnering with HRF to make it about freedom tech completely changed the vibe, the content, people that were there. I really enjoyed doing the hackathon. I liked when Roger Zingeldine talked about Tor and how he communicates with the larger world about how this is a necessary piece of infrastructure. Yeah, overwhelmingly positive. I was really stoked to have that happen. Yeah, it was
HRF. HRF being the signaling it was HRF to me being involved was the signaling mechanism that it was going to be more high signal and worth my time coming out for it. And I couldn't agree more.
And it's
I mean,
10
in the
years of the
past,
digital currency initiative too. Like that's been around for a while, churning research out at the same.
but in the past, it's been more like crypto blockchain stuff, right? And like this time was more focused on Bitcoin.
Definitely. People showing me Flexa and Algorand last time I was there, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a high signal group that were there. I mean, I was fanboying a little bit on some of the Bitcoin. I won't name names, but some of the Bitcoin developers that were there.
Well, and I saw you on stage. You were like, "Oh man, I'm getting imposter syndrome. I'm speaking at MIT. Yeah. What? It was so cool."
Well, my mom was watching the live stream. I almost said, "Look, Ma, I made it to MIT." Because there's no shot I would have gotten in when I was applying for colleges. So it definitely felt that way. It felt a little bit unreal. The background for my calling out Rob for the open source was I was making my deck and I was going to put a slide in there about how there's this beautiful, sustainable method of maintaining open source software where you have a company like AnchorWatch and then they have their open source software stack, Trident Wallet, that's available to the world, but then they monetize it through Lloyd's of London insurance. And there's, it's beautiful because you don't have to rely on grant funding or anything else. And I'm like searching around for their license for Trident Wallet. And I'm like, oh, this is not open source. So I just scratched it from the deck. But yeah, one day I think it's just an order operations thing. I think they intend to fully open source it.
Yeah, and that brings up something else, which is like why we're operating as a dev kit like BDK or Lightning Dev Kit that's grant funded. I think we've seen that the sort of privacy wallet idea is dead as a funding source. It's too high risk, and there's also this problem where all these shortcuts are made to get a product out that has military grade encryption or whatever. You just say whatever you need to secure a bag, and the incentives are not aligned to actually serve the users to bring the privacy up. And we get at these local maxima too, where it's like, okay, I have the monopoly business. I'll focus on telling everyone that my thing is the best instead of fixing any further problems, because there's just no incentive for me to do that. And I think that's changing, which is welcome, but it's difficult.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of saw that with both Wasabi and Samurai last cycle, where they were like, we've solved Bitcoin privacy.
And it was not solved. Like, I didn't recommend that stuff to people. I wasn't like, yeah, go use that because there's too many ways it can go wrong. HRF can't tell people like go and use Whirlpool. You'll be safe for sure. It's like, no, not the case.
No. The bigger issue is the regulatory exposure of taking a cut of, even if you're not taking custody, taking a cut of the flow of transactions seems to be where a lot of the regulatory targets come from.
From a narrative perspective, I think so. I don't know if that's actually the legal circumstance, but I think that's where the regulator gets upset because they're like, you're a person, you're making money, you shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah. Like clearly you're involved because you're making money from people using the tool.
Yeah, but like Signal, people are involved using Signal and we don't, like, they're not going to jail for...
But it's donation based. It's value for value. You can use it for free.
WhatsApp then? WhatsApp has encrypted messaging.
WhatsApp is just spyware. Yeah, I mean, they're fine with that because they're just
like we've been able to get to this.
They're getting all the metadata though. They're just getting all the there was a handshake deal that happened there behind the scenes. It was like, yeah, it's if 1.5 billion messages are going through WhatsApp, we can let them think it's private. And they also do like clear text backups and stuff like that's WhatsApp is a dark pattern. Like, hopefully we don't emulate WhatsApp. I think Signal is one of these massive wins. This successful, independent, relatively sustainable, donation-funded, open-source privacy project. I think it's harder. It helped that there was a couple billionaires involved in making sure that's funded. Yeah, and I mean, some of them are the same. Like, I think Dorsey doesn't get enough credit he took TextSecure into Twitter and then which was the precursor to Signal, and then let them spin out Signal as a nonprofit entity without like taking any IP or anything. And like he like birthed it to a degree.
Yeah, it takes
and then
these
Twitter
live
never
player
had
actions.
encrypted DMs. What?
It takes these live player actions. Like this stuff doesn't just happen because the incentives are set up right. Like people actually need to make moves.
So
I heard you talking to Nifty about this. Yeah. It's tricky. How do you get the model right?
There's no perfect model. It's the real world is difficult. So I'm curious. So like, how is Payjoin Dev Kit funded right now? What is your current funding situation?
OpenSats, shout out Odell, and Spiral. I'm trying to think if we have income from other I think those are the two right now. So it's individual grants for the most part at the moment, but stay tuned. If you're a business who wants to see this in the world, get in touch. We'll make an integration happen and we'll take this to the next level. That's what I'll say for now. So
what I think is like, and that, by the way, that wasn't a setup. It's hard for me to keep track of. Of who we're actively funding and who we're not. I said to someone the other day, I was like, I'm really proud that we're funding you. He's like, my grant ended like 4 months ago. Like, you guys didn't renew me or whatever. I was like, well, I did, I wasn't trying to be a dick. Because it's way bigger than me at this point. I mean, we have Gigi himself is just a quiet warrior. And we have some part-time people there. But then at the end of the day, we have our 9-person volunteer board. And then we have a bunch of volunteer committee members that are reviewing stuff. And it's just it's a full-time job in itself. I
got to give HRF a shout out too, because Human Rights Foundation had this bounty out all last year that
they're great,
that we were able to secure with this Bull Bitcoin integration as a team. So, and they've helped us from the very beginning. Since like 2021, I got a tiny grant to work on Payjoin, and that was before any of the dev kit existed.
Thank you, HRF. Doing great work. And we do a lot of code grants with them as well. Where I was going with it, I just got a little bit sidetracked, is I think an interest, just to talk about business on air, or not business, open source projects on air. I think the model that Cashew is doing is an interesting model where they spun up, and BDK is doing it as well, where they basically spun up their own foundation. I guess BTC Pay Server also, where they spin up their own foundations and then they take grants into that. And then they take actual independent donations out of that. And then they can pay all these different open source contributors, and they have more focus. Like, they know it's hard. Like, for instance, it's if Payjoin Dev Kit ends up having 20 contributors that are focused on different aspects of the project, it's really hard for an organization like OpenSats to be able to determine, where money needs to go and how best to place support. But if you have someone like Callie running the OpenCash Foundation, I think it's called, but it's called OpenCash, he knows where the contributors are, where support needs to happen, and you can greater focus the donate. And I guess that's kind of what Signal does too. Signal's probably a little bit more centralized.
Yeah, we have plans here. Stay tuned.
Okay. Well, if I can be helpful at all, let me know.
You already have. Yeah.
Awesome. I got nothing else. Do you have anything else you want to chat about before we wrap? This has been great.
This has been really good. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
I guess. Oh yeah. One more thing. So what's the next steps here? There's people that are listening that are founders of companies. There's people listening that are users of customers of businesses, users of wallets, maintainers of wallets. How do we get Payjoin in every wallet, every exchange? What is the next steps? What do you want to see from the community?
Yeah, we gotta do these integrations. So you mentioned Foundation. We've got, I think, 4 people full time right now and 1 part time. Like, people are working on the development kit actively. We've got these integrations out. We need people to own those. If you want to integrate Payjoin, come and say hi and use the dev kit. At this point, it's got bindings. It works in Python, Kotlin, Swift. We just did WebAssembly, so it'll work in the browser. We can adapt it for Go and C# pretty straightforwardly. Like, we need hands to plug those in. That's the main thing. If you want to get involved in research, once a week on Fridays, we have a study club in the Payjoin Discord, which you can find at payjoindevkit.org. We've got documentation being written and blog posts. People need to understand what's happening, but primarily those integrations need to happen. And if you're a commercial entity, if you're an exchange, that is probably where the biggest impact can be made. If your exchange supports this, you can do the cut through, you can get the savings, and you can protect the privacy of your users.
Awesome. You said if someone wants to integrate, they should come say hi. Is that payjoindevkit.com, or how do they say hi?
Payjoindevkit.org, yep. Or github.com/Payjoin is where we are. That would be the thing. You can find my contact at bitgould.com.
Love it. I'll put all those links in the show notes. Dan, thank you for joining us. I think, maybe 6 months to a year, we'll pull you back on and see where we're standing and do an update and just keep pushing. How do you think about that?
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. Freaks, thanks for joining us in the live chat. You make it special. Appreciate you all for supporting the show. I'm not sure when the next show will be, but if you keep track on Nostr, I'll keep you guys updated. We got some good conversations